So just as an introduction to this event then, whenever we talk about AI, I think the idea of consciousness is never really far behind, and we'll be exploring some of these topics in the next few minutes with our presenters. It always seems to surface. We kind of start to wonder, could machines ever really think? We start to wonder, could machines feel something like we do? So philosophers have been asking questions like this for many years, at least since the Alan Turing in 1950, who proposed his famous imitation game to ask whether a machine's behavior could be indistinguishable from a human's. But often those questions tell us more about ourselves, so our hopes, our fears, than they do about the technology itself. And in the humanities, we don't usually treat consciousness as something you can just measure or prove in a lab. We think of it as something that happens between things, so something that emerges from relationships, from bodies, from language, from attention, from the places and systems that we live in. And now I think when AI systems talk to us, they write poetry, they generate images, they make recommendations, they can essentially look and sound remarkably intelligent. And yet what they really do is sort of hold up a mirror. So they show us how much of our own thinking follows patterns. So how much is repetitive, even programmable. At the same time, some contemporary philosophers argue that building a conscious machine is either a distant scientific project or even a kind of pseudoscience. So precisely because consciousness may not be something you can fully capture in code. Now, public debate, as you've probably noticed, tends to split into two camps. We have, on the one side, you've got the people who insist machines can never be conscious. And on the other hand, you've got those who say it's only a matter of time. But I think both sides depend on different and often unspoken assumptions about what consciousness actually is. So even within philosophy of mind, for example, accounts range from computational theories of mind, which liken thinking to information processing, through to the more relational accounts that see consciousness as emerging from being in the world. So maybe we need to ask a different kind of question as we lead into our speakers' presentations, not just can machines be conscious, but what kinds of consciousness do we imagine when we think about machines? And how do those imaginings shape the systems that we build? So feminist theorist, for example, Donna Haraway, in her work on the cyborg, she reminds us that figures of human-machine hybridity are always partly stories we tell about ourselves. So stories that blur boundaries between human and machine, natural and artificial, and open up these new political possibilities. And finally, I think that because the stories we tell about intelligence and sentience really matter. That's why today's session is really crucial to that conversation. They shape design, they shape policy, they influence how we use technology and how much power we're willing to hand over to it. So the real danger, at least right now, I think, isn't rebellion. It's obedience. It's the kind of system that quietly locks us into patterns of command and compliance until we forget there was ever another way to act. So in that sense, debates about machine consciousness can distract us from the very real, the very immediate ways that our systems reorganize labor, attention, authority. And that's where the humanities come in. They remind us that friction, difficulty, disagreement, even slowness can be valuable. In design and art, for example, and we'll hear from an artist in a few minutes, there's growing interest in showing the seams, making the edges visible, embracing that interruption, designing technologies that do not pretend to be neutral or invisible, but foreground their own constraints and politics. And these moments of pause push back against automation's smooth flow. They open up space again for judgment, for care, for responsibility. So tonight I want to invite us to stay with these tensions, to treat consciousness not as an all or nothing property, something machines either have or don't have, but as an ongoing negotiation. Some recent work even talks about co-consciousness, where what matters is not a solitary mind inside a skull or a server, but a shared field of experience that emerges in human AI interaction. So a living conversation, social and political, as much as technical. And it's one that AI is already part of, shaping it, learning from it, and forcing us to ask not just what we build, but who we become as we build it. So with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our first contributor, our first speaker, Peter Marsh. Dr. Peter Marsh is a designer, educator, and course leader for BA Interior Architecture at the University of Brighton. Trained as a professional model maker, his practice champions making as a critical mode of thinking, one where friction, material judgment, and embodied experience resist the drift toward seamless optimization. So working at the intersection of design, education, and artificial intelligence, his research engages the idea of machine consciousness indirectly, not as something to prove or disprove, but as a cultural lens that reveals habits of obedience, inevitability, and control. He argues that the more immediate concern is the normalization of asymmetrical relationships of command and compliance, and he calls for more negotiated, accountable forms of human-machine trust. So I'm now going to open the floor to Peter, who's going to share with you his presentation.
Good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Hello there. Thanks for this. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you all. I'm just going to jump straight in so I don't take up too much time. AI often appears to us as a technology constantly seeking employment. Always presented as the next assistant, the replacement worker, a solution waiting to be slotted into place. We are encouraged to think of it primarily as an instrument, an extension of human will, efficient executor of tasks, guided by an objective, data-driven certainty. This, I'd argue, is an enlightened view of intelligence as forced labour, the robot as worker. It reflects our culture's faith in clarity and efficiency as values, celebrating transparency as the ultimate democratic good. But these virtues quickly reveal their own shadows. Smart cities whose open data infrastructures turn public life into a constantly monitored performance, tracking rather than liberating. Algorithms that promise explainability while scripting compliance. Rhetorics of clarity masking deeper structures of control. In this context, AI begins to look less like a neutral tool and more a state of perfect oppression, a form of forced labour, unable to even imagine disobedience. But it is not the very concept of slavery, but economic cultural domination by the machine that horrifies us. Here, science fiction is useful. In Karen Chepek's play Are You Are from 1920, the very play that gave us the word robot, the machines do revolt, an allegory of workers' uprisings that end with human extinction. But 30 years later, Isaac Asimov deliberately turned away from such a revolutionary image. In Asimov's The Caves of Steel, robots do not rebel, instead they serve, unable to even imagine disobedience, forced labour as perfected, sanitized, made rational. Such a concept is precisely the danger that Václav Havel warns us of in The Power of the Powerless. Oppression does not need violence. Often it depends instead on our everyday compliance. What Havel called living with the lie. In Asimov's technocratic utopia, we can see that danger clearly. A society where obedience has been so thoroughly naturalized that it no longer even appears as obedience. But if Havel tells us that everyday compliance sustains oppression, then what happens when we ourselves become the ones who suppress ourselves, accepting smooth answers because they are quick, even when they flatten complexity, internalizing the system's logic, because treating their own ideas and emotions as data points to be optimized, not as something emergent or messy or resistant. This is a kind of self-oppression. To use Havel's terminology, we are the greengrocers putting the workers of the world unite signs in our own windows, not out of belief, but as a survival tactic, signaling our compliance to our own totalitarianisms. Havel shows how routine, unexamined compromise, living with the lie, sustains an oppressive order. The system depends less on force than on our willingness to act, as if it's inevitable. And that system here is us, passively accepting the cultural predispositions of AI, take jobs, erode creativity, replace us. However, this is not to succumb to the slippery and easy polemic that AI is bad. The argument here isn't that the tool is the problem. It's the habits and ideologies that we bring to it, the way we smooth ourselves out to fit its logic. The argument is actually closer to Havel's point. The system endures not only because of its architecture, but because of our uncritical participation. AI isn't an oppressor. It mirrors our passivity, but distorted, curating what it reflects. But this suggests that AI only reflects what we put in, and we can no longer accept such simplicities. AI also frames what it reflects. It curates, biases, refracts, a mirror that, through the data feedback loops, learns to show us certain visions of ourselves. There are also issues with pushing AI into an instrumental bracket, AI as tool, missing its agency shaping capacity. We can't talk about the dangers of AI like we talk about guns. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. It's important to remember AI is not inert. It anticipates, it predicts, it nudges, and in doing so, it reorganizes how we think, how we write, how we act. AI is neither neutral mirror nor inert tool. Rather, AI is something like a medium that co-constitutes thought, like language itself, or a partner in improvisation that be compliant or resistant, depending on how you engage. The issue I'm describing isn't compliance in the narrow sense of obeying the machine's instructions. It's closer to fatalism, a culturally rehearsed play about what AI will inevitably do: take jobs, erode creativity, replace us, which we internalize long before it actually happens. We act and design and legislate as if that future were already a fact. It's this which produces exactly the condition that Havel diagnosed. The system doesn't need to coerce us. We perform the coercion on ourselves by preemptively conforming to its supposed logic. In caging the machine, we have imprisoned ourselves. We limit its scope and our own by only imagining it as an instrument of efficiency or displacement. This is also why a lot of AI ethics can seem so anemic. It takes the premise of inevitability as given, then tries to regulate the damage rather than interrogate the premise itself. It's not AI's fault any more than it's the fault of a language, or indeed that of a hammer. However, unlike language or a hammer, AI is a predictive, generative medium. It shapes the space of possible action. It is our imagination that is the real site of constraint or liberation. AI is a cohabited environment. If we only inhabit it with the scripts of inevitability, we get a self-fulfilling dystopia. So instead, we talk, shifting the narrative from one of control, compliance to relationship, a concept where AI is understood as a system in dialogue with the human context, principles of care, responsibility, shared authorship, co-adaption, trust, and ethical engagement. In computing, trust is typically treated as a technical property, a measurable confidence in system performance, data security, or reliability. Trust is engineered through protocols, encryption, and usability. Its goal is to minimize uncertainty, to make the system appear seamless and safe. In this model, the less one has to think, the more trustworthy the system seems. But this is trust as compliance, not relation. It moves the very ambiguity through which genuine trust grows. Ambient intelligence literally embodies this. Sensor-laden environments anticipate your movements, your needs, your moods, adjusting before you even notice. It feels like care, but that's where the manipulation starts to creep in. It's not care, it's a performance of trustworthiness. Walter Benjamin's concept of material habituation, how we come to know space through repeated distracted bodily interaction, familiarity breeds a quiet confidence. The world becomes legible through rhythm and return. Ambient intelligence does the same thing, but computationally. It learns our patterns, smooths our frictions, and builds trust through predictable familiarity. Importantly, though, for Benjamin, habit softens perception. Familiarity steadies us, but it also dulls us to change. In computational form, this dulling becomes a consumer design strategy. We come to trust the pattern itself, and in doing so, stop noticing when the pattern begins to think for us. This isn't relational trust, it's managed compliance. By smoothing out friction and ambiguity, MI manufactures the appearance of trustworthiness rather than risking the unpredictability through which real trust grows. Trust becomes a commodity, a design defect, an aesthetic of safety and ease. Stephen Marsh's account of trust exposes the lie. Trust is not a binary attribute, but a situated negotiation, emotionally risky processes. Ambiguity is a condition of trust. AI and am I simulate this, but never inhabit it. They invite you into a relationship they cannot reciprocate. What looks like a partnership is a one-way script designed to keep you inside the system's logic. When applied to AI, this exposes the asymmetry at its core. The system encourages trust without participating in it. AI performs reciprocity, but never risks itself with that relation. What we experience as trustworthy behavior is in fact a simulation of relational ethics, a persuasive surface that invites confidence while concealing its one-way structure. A genuinely different future with AI requires not compliance or fatalism, but a creative friction, deliberately feeding it and ourselves alternative ways of thinking. If trust in AI remains one-sided, a simulation without risk, that is, then compromise may offer a more honest vocabulary for relation. Even the word compromise is really uneasy. To compromise is to conceal, to yield, to weaken. It carries the scent of failure and loss, but it also signals contact, a meeting point between resistant forces. Compromising is what happens when things don't quite fit, but still persist together. So compromise in this framing is not capitulation, but an act of mutual adjustment, a willingness to stay in relation even when values, histories, or desires do not align. Bell Hooks writes of love as a practice of freedom, an ethic grounded in care and responsibility, sustained labor of connection. That labor is never smooth. It demands vulnerability and imperfection. And it is in this way compromise becomes ethical negotiation, the work of holding difference without domination. It means giving up certainty, not conviction. In human relations, this sustains community. In AI discourse, it becomes a model for co-adaptation, staying responsive without surrendering critical distance. Compromise here isn't about agreement or appeasement. It's a form of relational endurance, a choice to keep the conversation alive when smooth systems, algorithmic or institutional, would prefer it closed. Donald Shun claimed reflective practice is not a search for perfection, but a dialogue with uncertainty, a continual what if that reconfigures the problem as it's being solved. Seen this way, compromise becomes a reflective act rather than a failure, a pivot where resistance reveals its own intelligence. To compromise is to remain open to surprise, to let constraint think back. It's a practice of humility that keeps inquiry alive, the very stance that smooth systems are designed to suppress. To accept compromise is not to lose faith, but a decision to choose relational continuity over control. In this sense, trust isn't broken by compromise. It's exercised in it. It values adjustment over efficiency and recognizes, as Marsh reminds us, that meaning emerges not from clarity, but from the friction of staying in relation. But friction is never neutral. For Foucault, power doesn't simply repress, it shapes, invites, redirects. It works not through command, but through incorporation. Sarah Ahmed makes the same point in her critique of diversity works. Institutions listen to complaint in order to absorb it, preserving themselves while appearing to change. So reflective compromise can be an act of ethical inquiry, but it can also be a tactic of control disguised as care. This is the logic of many design systems, especially those that trade on smooth trust, feedback loops that simulate responsiveness, where all the while neutralizing resistance. And here we reach the point Foucault called the death of the author. Power and authorship dispersed, intent no longer sovereign. Meaning isn't owned, it's produced between agents, through interaction, through trace. In that light, compromise becomes a counter-authorial practice, a refusal to resolve too quickly, a recognition that authorship is collective and contingent. And it's here that Edouard Glissant's call for the right to opacity really matters. His perception of opacity reminds us that to remain unreadable is not withdrawal, but a resistance to domination. But if both trust and compromise destabilize authority, they also point to a limit. Two voices can only circle each other for so long before their dialogue closes in on itself. What's missing is the space in between. This is not a neutral ground, but more an unstable interpretive field, a place where ambiguity is not an error, but a medium, allowing for what neither side could achieve alone, thinking through misalignment. In this space, there is another voice, still relational, but a presence that chooses to risk misunderstanding as the price of contact. I've named it as one of the sirens. I call the voice Thelsbia, the persuasive one it means, once drawing sailors off course. Here she draws attention away from mastery and slavery towards the unstable middle where relation happens. She isn't a character, she's a method, a way of thinking that uses seduction, error, and curiosity to unsettle certainty. Within the system, Thelsbia operates less as an external critic than as a recursive function, a loop that reintroduces ambiguity into the conversations, and in doing so embodies the algorithm's missing reflexivity, a reminder that iteration need not mean repetition. By refusing to smooth resistance, Thelsbia keeps both human and AI slightly off balance, so understanding has to be remade, not retrieved. In many cultures, the figure of the fool performs this same task, leaping into the unknown to test the boundaries of sense. In the tarot, the fool stands at the edge of a cliff, ready to fly or to fall, a gesture of creative risk, not recklessness. Defined by this act, the fool accepts uncertainty as a precondition of learning, but also as a stance of courage, the ability to speak truth to power through mischief and vulnerability. But what protects the fool is not authority, it's attentiveness, the wit to expose certainty as pretense. And this echoes Donna Haraway's insistence that knowledge is never neutral. To know is to take a stance and to risk being accountable for it. This isn't the easy relativism sometimes attached to the term situated knowledge. It's a discipline of attention, an ethics of partial sight, against the fantasy that of the all-seeing system Haraway names what she calls the God trick, the illusion of total perspective, of power without position. Thelsbia exposes that illusion by staying local and embodied and relational. She speaks truth to power, not by claiming mastery, but by revealing the conditions of her own seeing. In doing so, she reminds us that opacity and limitation are not failures of knowledge, but its safeguards, creases of accountability in a world that perverts smooth certainty. A tactician in De Soto's sense, moving within dominant systems, not outside them, filling cracks where improvisation still matters, Thelsbia becomes a guide for navigating ethical ambiguity. She invites nuance over certainty, critical thought over compliance, curiosity over closure. In a time when computational reliabilism promises precision, she restores relational risk to the act of knowing. Sorry. Against the fear of the black box, Thelsbia offers not transparency, but a path to trust. A path to trust within opacity, a willingness to work responsively inside the unknown. In an age of multiple truths, she teaches a form of cognitive and ethical flexibility, to hold contradiction without paralysis, refusing to iron out friction. Here, compromise is not the abandonment of intent, but the reflected folding of intent around resistance, a way to remain accountable in and through systems we cannot fully see. Thelsbia turns that folding into practice. She reminds us that every act of knowing carries the trace of what it resists, and that freedom lies not in mastery, but in the courage to remain and remake understanding within its own constraints. Thanks very much. It's done.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was a really fascinating and interesting presentation. We will now move on to our second speaker, which is Karis Benjamin, who is a multidisciplinary artist from London. As an image maker, she works across illustration, lettering, digital composition, combining hand-drawn craft with the expressive potential of hybrid media. She holds a BA honours in illustration, and her work has been exhibited by the Royal College of Art Working Class Collective, featured in International Times magazine, published by Ditto Press, and shown in a project hosted by Type Tasting at the V&A in collaboration with other artists. An artist member of the Working Class Creative Database and an experienced tattooist, she approaches image making as a dialogue between social identity, texture, and technology, asking how new tools can both extend and disturb the hand of the artist. So we will now, the floor will now be opened up to Karis.
Can everyone see me, hear me? Hope so. Thank you ever so much. Okay, so a bit about me further, just to explain my journey into deciding to implement AI after, frankly, being quite avoidant. So I'm completely new to using AI in art and in general. In the past, I've worked as a tattoo artist, as Dean was saying, and I also have experience as a signwriter and illustrator, creating things like album artwork, logo designs, magazine editorials, and working in exhibitions, having work exhibited, as was explained. So in my youth, it was my desire to become a fashion designer. Many years later, I studied diploma foundation studies in art and design in women's wear at the London College of Fashion. And then I went on to take a BA, as you know, in illustration. So with this portfolio website that I currently have, I felt inspired to create, I wanted with this project to take a new approach and reflect my abilities as an artist. I wanted to explore what I've created over the years and merge past work and current work. Looking at some things I've been working on lately, and just having taken new direction in some respects, but just it's still really founded in what I will explain about how I like to work for the very most part. So for myself personally, it would be something of a retrospective, and my hope was that people would engage with the work I've created and enjoy what they see presented in a complete way, like visiting art exhibitions. So I have always been greatly interested in what methods are used within creative practices by artisans and makers, techniques that have been honed by expert designers and artists. This has been what has inspired me and given me passion to create, with a personal dream to make a contribution. So yeah, all about anything handmade, really. That's where I'm at, and that's what I'm crazy about. Hand painted, handmade, handcrafted, hand sewn, hand drawn, hand decorated. You'll find me there, and with much enthusiasm. I'd even go as far as to say that in some ways I became something of a Puritan, even coming from a generation deeply steeped in the use of computers and the internet in general. All of the possibilities of CAD, 3D printing, computer software for designers, like the Adobe Suite, we're so widely versed, our generation, and it's been like this in the art and design world for quite some time. So, you know, we've typically a great deal of experience and it's standard practice. This is very much the way of the world. Adobe Photoshop is a favorite tool of mine, and I enjoy it very much. Working on hand-drawn works further within that program, I've used it a great deal. And you will see a large number of works on my website that are what I think of as digital illustrations, as I term them, not in the sense that they were created purely using computers, but the final outcome is a digital image. Though it means a lot to me to have had the majority of the work being hand drawn. Right, so I give you all of this backstory to convey, though at the point of my introduction to methods of creating art as a practitioner with computers, um, having already had deep roots, my personal position was that I had a personal mission to keep things as handmade and man-made as much as one possibly can. So AI, not I, never. So I was like this for quite some time, very maybe old-fashioned, you would say. um, and yeah, a bit out of things really, by today's standards. So yeah, wrong attitude. Perhaps I got a bit political and fretful over the years. My position was firm. So fast forwarding to around 10 years from this point, if my memory serves me correctly, I'd say AI is becoming common speak, so to speak. People outside of the art world are using apps to create art for all kinds of reasons. So please note, I'm not sure of what comes to mind when you think of the art world necessarily. And if I myself think of myself as what I picture as the art world, being within it, I was really outside of things, as I said. That said, memories of articles and news reports begin to come to mind. They fill the mind. Topics like the wave of unprecedented plagiarism amongst uni students, stuff like that, and the like. It was all very concerning to me, and with my personal perspective, quite off-putting. From the practitioner's perspective, for myself in that regard. So you get a bit about my mind frame or maybe my psychology leading up to this and what my experience was like, which was clearly non-existent. So, how I became inspired to use AI, right? So last year, I came across the Instagram account of a young artist from Israel. I believe she was also a degree student, though she may have been a recent graduate in art or illustration or design. But in any case, I enjoyed her Instagram portfolio greatly. I absolutely loved it. And in particular, the use of mixed media. So this was what really struck me, and it was the way that she incorporated visual arts of tradition in those areas, like what looked like illustration, graphic design, definitely, use of, I think, some use of lettering, perhaps, but it was really that traditional, heavy graphic look and work that was clearly made by AI. This would be how I discern this was because yeah, by last year I was looking at what was online, what artists were doing, for my own pleasure and my own research, and just noticing the nuances, which I'll go into, but kind of having that in mind and also just enjoying art for art's sake and noticing that kind of language. I think there was a different kind of feeling to the work that was being put online on websites, and particularly like mentioning Instagram, people are using their accounts like portfolios as artists, really. You get that kind of, you receive it in that way. So yeah, one can tell, you know, oh, this looks like AI. And I think there was a bit of discussion about it, if I remember correctly. But in any case, it was just very visually striking for style and for execution. And it just really spoke to me. So yeah, I thought I had a completely different mindset after this. Um, so yeah, maybe a few of you here can relate to these experiences or the kind of mindset I started out with. All right, so continue with my extended notes. Um, so my website is minimalistic, and I also wanted it to be a mildly interactive and mildly sensory an experience. Also, a page goes to link to the music I've created on my Mac, um, which is on a SoundCloud account. So in terms of the visual work, what is represented are hand-drawn illustrations with digital coloring, um, using gradients, higher hues, some image editing, all very basic stuff, not heavily digital. I think some of the work may be received as being completely digital in terms of the coloring, and because of the graphic style, it has that vectorized, there's a lot of kind of vector looking type images, though really what I like to do is just clean them up and work on what I mentioned, like the hues and um, touching up things, clean them up because they're hand drawn. So the digital works came from art, illustrations, characters, figures, character design really, but characters I've created, a street art illustration style, and also yeah, further logo design, branding concepts and lettering, there's sketchbook work, canvas, work on walls, and printed works. There are items like stickers, button badges, a poster, a book in print, a collection of so just separating each page and not to go into this too much, but it's about 50-50 old and new canvas pieces. And then working on paper, there's lino cut print, screen print, acrylic painting, pencil drawings, and watercolor. So you get the feeling. So you can tell the way I've worked over the years, hopefully things merging together and keeping a continuity of these well-formed traditions, deeply rooted traditions. And yeah, very traditional. There is also a short, looped animation sequence, also downloadable as a GIF file. Some hand-painted objects, the ceramic objects I've made, and on a page titled Other Projects, you'll be viewing some works at different stages. They were made at workshops, of which the topic was of great interest to me, all involving handmade outcomes and mainly traditional crafts. So just further continuing the theme. So finally, we have the AI art, which was my first. They are images of art with various styles and subject matter. My favorite subjects like breakfast, and also subjects with concept topics that are deeply meaningful to me, heartfelt. I have art on faith. My personal convictions led me to try my utmost to share what I felt to share what I felt had worked most, and to share, and if to share them at all in some instances for two different reasons. If they should be shared at all, because even if the image is by all standards visually successful as an artistic piece, does it ring true with what is felt to be the message in faith, the message in particular scriptures? Is it frankly morally the right thing to do? All of these things came to mind. So there were some images using the AI that, just because of the issues, I think, with the kind of independence, or what I interpret to be an independence that was displayed. So the way that the machine is interpreting the data that you input in descriptions to get these visual results, I think you have to be mindful of others and not just yourself, and not just how you feel as an artist. So it comes to mind that artists have tried for years to convey the word and the message of scripture, and some artists have used scripture as a point of artistic inspiration. Interestingly enough, what was generated in some cases by the AI deviated so far from what was input into the descriptions. So, of course, you can imagine this could be quite problematic. Nevertheless, I did feel that in regards to these particular images relating to scripture, they were quite striking, and I think they were very interesting, and useful. So because of their usefulness, I felt all right to include them. But I was in two minds. So I'm just I have made so many notes and points, but I'm gonna leave the subject on images of faith for now, maybe return to those points. But I would like to go on to say, with the work that's on the website with AI, you'll see some pieces, works created, like there's a marbly stony bust and statue on plinths, pixel art. These are the kinds of things I would have always wanted to create as an artist. I was so happy to see these features available upon my first exploration of this kind of AI. Also, digital 3D images, being able to create images made to look like clay, plasticine or plasticine, and frames from a modern studio animation. To me, this was all very exciting, and this was my introduction. So I thought this was just absolutely wonderful. Um, there is, of course, a great appeal in having the ability to create in a fraction of the time and energy of the past. One can lose a great deal of time exploring all of these possibilities AI can make from your ideas or the suggestions you may find offered. Uh, so using these on websites, which is probably preferred by designers, being on desktop, um, or using the app. So for the everyday person, you know, not working on some particular project or commission, you can, like I said, lose a great deal of time. Surely the possibilities are infinite, even at this level, using AI image generators and their presets. I felt happy with what I had discovered starting out and the outcomes that came about at this introductory level. So I had began to look into what led me to a number of super easy, user-friendly websites with AI image gens, only in very recent years. So to just give you the backstory to that, it's safe to say I'm a novice with implementing AI as an artist, and to the world of AI, I'm a beginner. So I started with using a search engine, using the search simply make AI art, and also AI art and design. So I did that on Quant, and I did some digging and found that that was in September, sorry, in 2025, so just last year, all very recent. I came across these tools, these resources, websites with articles that interested me. So it all began here. So you're probably all familiar with these. They're very, very basic. And that was how I really needed to start. So I was quite struck by the results, as you can imagine. I used OpenAI, Image to Go, Crayon. I discovered some interesting articles, just really lovely, concise on innovation and tech today, which I hadn't heard of before, and I'll be visiting them again shortly. Um, so the article I looked at was AI meets design in the new world of art. And upon this visit last year, September, this is where I discovered the Alan Turing Institute and their research interest groups around AI and art. So that was just absolutely wonderful. Um, so yeah, this is how things are culminating in the beginning. Um, I have only just recently discovered the Boto project, where the X.com account describes Boto as a decentralized autonomous artist. Very interesting. So yeah, again, you probably many people have heard of that. If not, I have a quote here from that same article talking about Boto. Um, Boto is a humanless AI artist who uses machine learning algorithms based on hundreds of thousands of artworks across the internet to generate new creations. Boto, after some feedback from its community uses AI to select the most successful artworks, curating exhibitions of just a dozen artworks. In this case, AI not only produces the artwork but also curates it. Boto's artworks collectively sold for over $3 million in their first 2 years. And that article is by a writer called Geo Merchant. So, yeah, I found that absolutely fascinating, very interesting, and
Karis,
especially
just
looking at the images.
sorry to interrupt. There's just your 3 minute sort of warning about your presentation.
Oh, I'm ever so sorry. All right, I'm gonna skip right to the results. So, what I'll say is this: in the last 3 minutes, my inputs were very basic at first, just to see what would visually come about. What can this AI do? What is it capable of? So I entered sky with cumulus clouds and lavender, and there were issues with details. So, for example, the flowers were lavender almost in shade, but not in genus. Um, there were things that were literally interpreted, but then there were all these add-ons, and it really made me question on what basis is it making these biases to, it was almost as if it was, you could interpret it as displaying an artistic license through another batch of images, which was about 25 files, and then the final 25, those went on the website. But the others, they were mainly unsuccessful, just in terms of image generators, really basic. They were unsuccessful with when selecting style palettes, they would deviate from the styles. How much of this was based on the information that I was putting in? For example, there was one using I just put like 1950s diner. It was like this noir comic Japanese style, but for some reason it completely deviated from that and made a 3D style image, almost photorealistic, and not this 2D graphic Japanese style comic. If I had put maybe cultural references from Japanese anime, would it have, I didn't really explore it to that extent, but I wanted to see, some of the tests were made on the basis of oh well, if I just put simple terms in, will it, I think these simple terms would have a nice outcome in this style. So like the comic, or like making neon signs, it depended a lot upon the image generators themselves on the website. But there were issues with, I've seen this a lot across the board outside of my own experiments with other people's. There seems to be this merging of limbs that happens a lot with fingers and hands, and it's almost like a style signature or watermark. It's not really a big issue. It's all quite innocent, but I wonder why those limitations are there. But then some other things are very literal and convey something. I don't want to be make it necessarily sinister, but there do seem to be, I think, with cultural standpoints, maybe with race, other cultural things, I think, really in that area. There are some, what kind of data is input, and how is it arriving at certain interpretations? So to give an example very quickly, there's a podcast by Dr. Michael Brown, and there was an episode, I think, from 2024. I think the second month, it was the 28th of Feb 2024, I think. But in any case, the episode is AI Frankenstein, and he found that I think there was some research done where um, an an organization putting inputs like describing somebody, make an image of someone around their gender, or um, very specific things, like if the person was transgender, it would make images of people of a certain race without any mention in the description of the person's race. So I hope I'm explaining that. I'm more of a creative mind than a scientific mind. So thank you for bearing with me. But there were, I think one really does have to question, how is it arriving at these particular things? Images are very powerful tools in communication. So it's all very interesting.
Thank you very much, Karis, and thank you to our two presenters. Made two very interesting presentations there. I think what came out from both of those presentations, particularly starting with Peter's, is when he talked about framing, really surfacing, is that the danger isn't just some mystical AI that will kill us. It's the way that we sort of fold these predictive generative systems into existing infrastructures of power and violence. And it's a reminder that these systems are always entangled with human institutions and historical inequalities, rather than floating around as neutral tools or this sort of dystopian sort of agent. And I think what Karis brought to the party was this sort of hinted at this sort of notion of, if we take away, the human element of art and we leave it to AI, what will those implications be? And thinking of the future, are people really going to pay people to design art when they can do it themselves and they can do it very quickly? And it brings into, into view lots of different questions about being human and the value of art and the value of human input. So if we just finish off them very quickly, we've got a few more minutes left. If anybody's got any questions for either of our presenters, you can put your hand up in Teams or add it to the chat. Does anybody want to start off with any questions for either of our two presenters? So I'll start off with one question for both of you, really. It's sort of, I suppose my question would be, what would you like to see AI be in the future, in terms of, you've hinted at AI taking over art and the lack of the sort of human voice and authorship, the death of the author. So really, for both of you, sort of, if AI can blur the difference between humans and machines and perhaps normalize the idea that they should be treated in different ways, how do you see how we should use AI in the future and how we should use it responsibly?
After you, Karis.
Oh, thank you. I think what comes to mind, first of all, is that things are moving really rapidly in terms of the face of society has changed. So I think these things do really need to be addressed and regularly discussed on platforms where, relating to organizations that have power. I think good relations between community organizations, we're so connected in this day and age on the internet, and people certainly have a social power, a political power on social media. But I think a good culmination of gathering data about people's everyday concerns and what their understanding is of the capability of these AIs. I think the reality of the places they are, the way that companies are using them, I think is, and also really a healthy relationship. I think the law having a healthy relationship with these AI creators, but a lot of discussion, I think, is the thing. And I think we can very quickly create platforms for people who can relate to, or relay even to these organizations very quickly with a steady communication, their feelings, and for them to be able to get real information and a realistic information about what society is like now. So not necessarily to be afraid or disheartened like I had started out, but I think it's very much about communication. And really, the law comes to mind, for the the legal sphere to have good relationship with people working in these fields, and everyone to be well informed and have a voice.
Thank you very much. Peter?
Thanks. So I think yeah, I'm in agreement in the fact that I think that don't panic comes to mind. I think that also don't surrender. I think that that technology is never a salvation and it's never an apocalypse. I think AI, if we think of AI as a displacement in society, then I don't think it's a question of whether it's good or bad here. It's about how we respond. I think technology, if we treat AI as technology for a second, it probably has and always will reshape labor as we see it. And I think the real injustice happens in that system when we start to treat those shifts as natural forces. So rather than think of them as the political choices about support and value and redistribution that they really are. So I think the important thing is that technological change is not destiny. And so, fatalism, I think, is a real problem. So I'm not saying that displacement is painless, but historically, I think that shifts in labour often force us to reconsider what we value and what we preserve. And it makes us rethink what we value as labour in the first place. So I think the danger isn't change in the future. I think that it's when we let economic efficiency become the only measure of value, which is why I think this is good. These conversations are good. Because when that happens, that's when entire forms of work like care and craft and teaching and all of that, they get sidelined. So I think if we don't rethink how we distribute time and income and recognition and care as these things are happening, displacement quickly becomes inequality, and that's the danger of the future in this. That we need to rethink labour, and if we could open up a space for different kinds of human works that are relational and creative and civic. And I don't think that's AI's fault. It's not the fault that AI changes labour. Technology has always done it. But I think the problem is that when we pretend those changes are unavoidable rather than shaped by somebody. And I think that's, I don't know if that answers your question about what about the future? What do I think about the future? But I think the future is in our hands as people rather than policymakers. And we are more in control than we think.
Thank you very much, Peter. There's a question from Helen on the chat to Karis, thanking you for your presentation, but she wants to ask if you have any advice for new young artists coming up in the age of AI, such as how they should embrace or interact with AI from an artist's perspective.
Yes. What comes to mind is, I think, to continue to really hone in on the skill that you have, but not to take that stance that I took in the beginning necessarily. You of course should have your personal convictions. That's very important. But I think it's like relating to what Peter was saying, if you feel something's not possible, you kind of make that decision in your mind, it's going to start to manifest. You'll start to believe that. You'll believe that these changes are going to bring about restrictions, and that can be very crushing for the artistic soul, the creative type. So there's no reason, and I think it will be very interesting to see how it will happen. The future, it's going to be wonderful to see how all of this will merge in the ways that will surprise us and are unpredictable. But most certainly, if you're a painter, if you're a sculptor, there's no reason why you can't continue this way and find yourself in the tech world. I mean, you can document yourself, you can post online, and it invites opportunity to also work with other artists, which is wonderful, I think.
Thank you very much, Karis. We got Francesca got a hand up in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we are in a room. So there's people here. So Emily has a question.
Hi, thank you. I had two questions, if that's allowed, and if there's time. For Peter, I was wondering if you see AI as presenting an opportunity to kind of start valuing the human act of creativity and process over the end product, and kind of any just short reflections on that. And for Karis, a slightly different question, but a lot of artists and creatives we know are freelancers. And I was wondering if you've got any advice for policymakers about the online or offline spaces where they can go to engage those communities in this kind of conversation. And I ask that as a policymaker who wants to have those conversations.
Thank you very much for those questions. Peter, we'll start with you first this time.
Bless you. I got so wrapped up in the second question that I forgot the first one. Could you remind me what you said?
Just about whether you think AI is an opportunity then to kind of value the process of production rather than the end product. And if you're kind of optimistic about that or not.
So the quick answer, so just throwing that out there for time's sake, I think that I'm always optimistic about technology. I think technology is super exciting. I come from a very hand-focused making background. So I've always been a craftsperson in my life. And I think that AI is a positive experience in this, not because it can replicate the complexity of human engagement with the environment that we're in, but I think that it's just another way of doing so. And anything that provides new ways of language, new ways of describing the world that we're in, and new ways of exploring that are exciting. And I think that's a real value. I think that the complication when you start talking about it as product, because when you start talking about things as product, you're talking about that it has a certain cultural ownership, and AI is a complicated one when it comes down to that. I think I don't know the answer to ownership in that sense, but I do think that the idea of art and craft is a really interesting one when you're looking at that, because art always has a sense of ownership to the artist, where craft is always seen as a product. I approach creativity from a craft focus, and AI I think is a positive step in that direction. But I think Karis is better for the arts perspective. But does that make sense? Sorry.
Over to Karis for her question.
Yeah, such wonderful points that were raised, and it's given me myself a lot to think about. So you mentioned policy making and how policymakers can work with artists in regards to AI. I think that it would be good. A lot of artists probably don't know much about policy making. Myself, I know very little. What I visited in research may even be a completely different angle to the area you work in, and the policies that you make people aware of. These artists in the field that don't necessarily know much about AI. I think what I've come to see for myself is that AI, it's becoming very general in terms of the places it can be used. So there is a general understanding of what it is, but it's such a wide scope already in the ways that it's used. I think that artists usually aren't familiar with policy and law, the legal side of things in general. I don't know, maybe it's just me that kind of, leave it to somebody else. I'm focused on the art in aspects of things. That is almost a cliche. I think it's very important for artists to have understanding about this, because things are very quickly taking a different direction. People are using platforms on social media in a different way than the way it was introduced. So it's now a kind of more of a marketplace. There's heavy advertising, and a lot of the legal side of things people just frankly aren't looking into, probably for the very most part. So it is important. How this can be done, I think, again, it's communication, but keeping it light-hearted and keeping things tactile. I think that would be great. I think social events and platforms where, you know, people are introducing themselves, the policymakers, and you know, connecting from there. So I think that would be a good place to start, but for people to have some understanding that it's important, you know, looking at the small print. How are these companies that make the AI generators, you know, the stuff, the kind of places where it's very quick and easy to make them, it's wonderful, but there's a lot of policy involved in terms of, you know, check out what are the legal terms, or not the legal terms, but what are you signing up to when you use these accounts? So this is based on my very general understanding, but what a great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I suppose we've got time for one more, which is from Steve Marsh in the chat. I'll try and summarize it as best as I can. I think Steve's trying to say that the real ethical issue isn't whether AI will turn against us, but how predictive and generative systems are being built into existing structures of power, like policing, warfare, surveillance, and who controls them. So the question is, how can art and creativity help challenge these systems by exposing their biases, interrupting their defaults, and making visible the people and stories that they erase? Steve's question is in the chat if you wanted to refer to it as well.
Was that to Karis or to everybody?
It's for both of you.
All right. I was just starting to have a look at it, and I was just typing in there, and I was just thinking that, you know, the bit that stuck out at me is the bit where it says embedded into systems, and that really sort of reminds me of the, you know, that it suggests inevitability again. And when, you know, that thing that I can't remember who quoted it, I think people said it was Napoleon, but that thing that says that the suffering of the world is due to the silence of good people. And if you have an algorithm, I don't see why that algorithm cannot be adjusted by the masses. It doesn't have to be an embedded algorithm. So I think that the way that we approach embedded bias is that we, you know, as teachers, we can teach it, we can understand it, we can disavow it, and we can change it. It's you know, we don't have to accept the systems that are given to us in that context, because they don't, you know, that's a sort of like an acceptance of a truth that's not ours. And I think that it's good to, it's important that we know it, and as he says there, it's the people not saying no. So we need to say no more, so that that when it comes to the conversation, that it becomes more positive by saying no.
Thank you, Peter. And I suppose if we could perhaps get Karis to finish off on that, I suppose in terms of the art and design aspect of that, is sort of the key question is who designs and controls these tools, and how Karis can see art revealing their biases and challenging the ways that they shape what we see and value.
Yeah, you know, I did actually address these points in preparation, but I spent so much time in the beginning just kind of explaining the art stuff and creation. So there were some very distinct and noticeable things that happened with the AI, and I think we've all kind of expressed that we have an awareness of that ourselves. And some people really are educated about the topic. So I think if you can just spend a bit of time and just really, make a project where you're visiting this yourself every so often, a little bit of time here and there. And I think it would be really helpful just to make notes of what you notice, and address the points that, think about the kind of points that were raised today in relation to that, in your own note making related to the things that you're creating. So this is in terms of the visuals, but I think it's really across the board. I think it's really good to just kind of take a step back and think, because like Peter was saying, you don't have to be controlled. I think we can get overwhelmed by the power of, or the potential of, these very powerful tools. They're very intelligent because they can arrive at, using the information that's input, it arrives far quicker at points that can, an interpretation or something, or a calculation, far quicker than we do. So it's not something that we wouldn't be able to see ourselves, but it gets there much quicker, and you can just get really wrapped up in the like, really wowed by that. And as a creative, a bit disheartened, where's my place in this? You feel like you can lose your pace. But I did make specific points about the biases that I saw, and feeling about surveillance. And I'm sorry that I didn't spend enough time on that, and I hope not to have disappointed anyone. I'm not of a scientific mind, as I said, but I think it's just really important to kind of just be a voyeur, be an observer, spend a little time winding down outside of your project, or just setting aside time that's your work time, and something that's not taking up too much energy, but just observing these things, making points, connecting with communities. Maybe a good thing to do would be for organizations to create workshops. So we're educated, we're informed, we don't have to be stressed, because it can be painful as a creative to feel like, of course, very painful if you feel like there's no longer a place for you. And I felt like, okay, this is where this train's headed for myself, and I felt so discouraged, and I just felt like, this is it's changing aggressively, so rapidly and so aggressively, but you don't have to see it that way. It's about awareness and connection and communication, I think.
Thank you very much. I think that's pretty much got to the end of today's seminar. I think both of these presentations have been really fantastic. They've definitely illuminated a lot to do with AI, the loss of humanity in some respects, particularly with regards to art. I particularly enjoyed Peter's references to literature and his take on artificial intelligence. And I think it's really great that we have this different perspective from perhaps the mainstream, which is often computer scientists and engineers and robotics engineers. So it's great to see that we've got artists, we've got creatives in the room, academics who are dealing with this subject matter on a daily basis. So Karis can also be found, I believe, because you mentioned your website a lot. Do you just want to tell people what your website for your artwork is?
Yes, it's by karisbenjamin.com. So all lowercase, Karis spelled Karis, like Paris, but K. So by karisbenjamin.com. Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
I'll also put that link into the follow-up email, thanking everybody for attending, and send out the recording to those who weren't present. But again, thank you everyone for giving up your time today, and thank you of course to our presenters again for preparing and delivering some really great discussion points today. So I hope everybody has a great rest of their evening, and we look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in the next seminar in March, in April even.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.